Friends, welcome to yet another video in our series Finance and Investing Tidbits. The purpose of this video is to discuss the concept of break-even point and how it can be calculated. Welcome to this video. Now, break-even point is that level of sales at which the firm does not make either any profit or loss. So it is that point where the sales or revenue is exactly equal to total cost. So naturally, there is no profit or loss. No firm would like to stay at the break-even point. They would obviously like to go much beyond that. But here we are just talking about break-even point from a conceptual perspective. Now let us see how a break-even point can be seen in the context of various costs and revenue. So here is a chart where we are looking at quantity on the x-axis and amounts on the y-axis. And let's unfold the discussion one by one with various dimensions. So first and foremost, whenever we create capacity and set up a manufacturing activity or a service center, certain fixed costs get created. Now these fixed costs by definition have nothing to do with the quantity, and they are going to be incurred irrespective of whether any quantity is produced and sold at all. So moment we create capacity, the fixed cost meter starts ticking. So that graph is obviously parallel to x-axis, which represents quantity. Then we talk about the next level of cost, which is called as variable cost. Now variable cost is that cost which moves in tandem with the amount of sales that we are able to achieve. But it does not mean that the slope of the graph is going to be the same. Variable cost obviously would be much lower than our selling price. So naturally, the slope of variable cost line is going to be flat as compared to that of the sales line. So variable cost and fixed cost together, when we superimpose them on each other, we get the total cost line, which naturally variable cost line gets shifted up and gets mounted on the fixed cost line, and that's how we get the total cost line. Now, if you were to plot the sales line, which is in white, you can actually see that its slope is much higher than that of the variable cost. Now what we clearly see that there is an intersection point between sales line and total cost line, and that's exactly is called as the break-even point. So that is the level of activity or quantity up to which the company does not make money, and once it exceeds that, the sales exceed the total cost, and therefore we get into a profit zone there once we exceed the break-even point. The same break-even point can be reflected in terms of amount of sales on the y-axis. So I'm sure this would have given you a good idea about how we can look at break-even point in the context of sales and various costs. So let's further see how we can calculate this break-even point. So while being at the break-even point is not an ideal situation to be in, but it does tell us about the vulnerability of the firm, which means that if the sales fall below the break-even level, the firm is very vulnerable, and there is also an opportunity because as the firm is able to go much beyond the break-even point, the profits can dramatically go up. As we could actually see those two lines, that the gap between the two expands very dramatically. So break-even point is that level where we can see that all costs are recovered. Beyond the break-even point, the contribution margin, which is the difference between sales and variable costs, actually straight adds to profit because the fixed costs remain the same. And that's really the wonderful opportunity. Now let us see how we can derive the break-even point for a single product company. It can be very easily derived in terms of number of units. So for example, a cement company where one uniform type of cement is getting produced, we can easily arrive at the break-even point in terms of tons, for example. Let's explore this idea with a simple example of a dosa joint. Let us say that the dosa joint sells a dosa for 60 rupees a piece. The variable cost for making a dosa is rupees 15, and contribution therefore is 60 minus 15, 45. Now as I discussed earlier, this contribution is something which actually adds to the profits dramatically because Once you cross the break-even point, the fixed costs don't come into the picture, and every extra dosa that would be sold would straight contribute rupees 45 to profit. Now let us say that fixed costs per day are rupees 9,000. So 9,000 divided by 45, which is the contribution per dosa, actually becomes the break-even point. So this dosa joint has to sell at least 200 dosas a day, by doing which it will be able to recover its fixed costs as well as variable costs fully. Now, if they are able to sell any dosa beyond 200 and therefore exceed the break-even point, every extra dosa is straight going to add rupees 45 to profit, because that is the amount of contribution that the dosa joint gets by selling one dosa, which is selling price of 60 minus the variable cost of 15. So this contribution beyond the break-even point straight away adds to profits. In case of a multi-product company, calculating break-even point is not easy based on quantity, because you have so many different products which you can't add together, and same facility is being used by different products, so you can't really arrive at a quantity of one single product. But what can be done is we can look at the break-even point of the facility as a whole based on certain amount of sales. So we can calculate the break-even point in terms of sales by dividing the fixed costs of that facility by the collective contribution margin. So contribution margin of the basket of products, let's say, together is 25%, and fixed costs per year are 1 crore. Then 1 crore divided by 25%. 25% means 0.25. So 1 crore divided by 0.25, the break-even point will become 4 crores. So 1 divided by 0.25 becomes 4 crores. So for this facility, based on its current mix of products, now there could be 10 products, they are being sold in a certain quantity. So based on the budgeted quantity for all those products together, we can derive what is the minimum level of sales that we need to achieve, assuming the same product mix across all those products. And this is the minimum level of sales we would like to achieve, or we need to achieve, so that we are able to break even. How do companies improve their break-even point? I'm sure you can also think creatively, but here are some thoughts. The contribution margin, if it is able to improve, then the break-even point can come down. When we say improve the break-even point, what we mean is how can the break-even point be lowered? Now, lower the break-even point, the better it is, because there is a higher chance that your sales can exceed that break-even point. Higher the break-even point, it becomes very difficult for a firm to achieve that break-even point. So we need to ensure that the break-even point is brought down as much as possible. So that is something that can be achieved by improving the contribution margin percentage. So a few things that the firm was doing by itself, it can think of outsourcing. That is one way, right? Controlling and managing fixed costs, which is where outsourcing also comes in, because outsourcing converts fixed costs into variable costs. And also improving product mix. So in a 10 product company, if we are able to promote those products which are able to provide a higher margin to us, we can actually try and push and allocate more capacity to those products, and as a result, the break-even point as a whole can be brought down and we can easily exceed the same. I hope you like the video. If you have, kindly share it with your friends. Thank you very much.